the 4-person podcast needs to be a podcast with a purpose. Because 4 people, like we're all going to be stepping over each other, right? But the first 4-person podcast that I want to do, that I know that I want to, is I want to create user personas. I have some templates for user personas. I want to brainstorm them together with a group and then create them with a group. I don't need a lot, 2, 3 maybe, to help everyone understand the reason to develop user personas. Because so few teams that I've been on, so few places I've been in have used user personas. So I think it's super powerful and that more people should be doing it.
Yes. I was spoiled. I've never seen a CEO lean so quickly into a transformation that's why it went smooth. And that was the only reason I think it went smooth. The week that we told him, you have to do this, and he was like, deal. And he said nothing because I was a new guy. He had an architect right next to me, brilliant guy that had been there for about 10 years, knew everything about the architecture there. And when that happened, the next week, the next C-level executive call, I'm sitting there at the table, and we hired a UX firm, and they came up with the personas. Did 4 days in that. It was on a Monday.
UX people
did the 4 days.
Not shocking to me at all that UX people take time to figure out who the users are.
And it was great because it was all by hand. It wasn't digital or anything. It was straight. Get everybody in a room. We're going to put them on the wall, and by the end of the thing, all the wall was filled with drawings and writing. And then the next week, people were pitching ideas to him about, hey, I want to do this. And he goes, what persona is this for? And if you forget about it, I put them right up there on the wall. What persona is this for?
Yep.
You can't tell me? No. Until it meets one of them, no, we're moving on. And I'm like,
hallelujah.
He gets it. And I don't know, I don't know how he gets it, but he got it. And, and he's still doing it.
That's how, because now he's thinking in terms of the user.
Yes.
He's thinking in terms of the user first. And again, that's what we're driving at, is like, you need to reform your thinking about like, I'll build something and maybe somebody will use it. People develop that way, companies develop that way. That's fine. Hey, who am I? I'm just some guy on the internet. The most effective people, they want people to buy it and use it first before they go agree to build a whole bunch of other stuff. Maybe they'll do a screen design and show the screen design to you. Like literally no development work has been done at that point. Maybe they'll build some wireframes or a mock-up or something, or a functional wireframe or whatever.
The functional wireframe, and it's easy to do.
It's easy to do.
There's free programs out there, and you can do it with pictures, where if you click a certain spot on the picture, it functions like a button, takes you to it. Right. Why would you not?
Oh, why would you not? Oh, man, here you. This is
You're in. I'll bite for sure. Because if you're a middle manager and somebody's doing this kind of stuff, you're going to go, that's not productive. You're wasting time. Exactly what you would say when you see the team get together for a retrospective. What are you guys doing? You're talking about the last sprint? That's done.
You're wasting.
Move on. You're wasting time.
You're
wasting time. You're not building a product. It's a screen that does nothing. Go build the software. So that's the problem, right there.
The people.
It's the people that don't get it. They don't see the value of it.
I told him that I had to sit down with someone because he goes, I don't want to do this because it takes my hands off keyboard. And it was one of those conversations where you go look him in the eye and you go, you're better than just a person who puts their hand on a keyboard.
That's right.
And I'm like, you need to know that because somebody has drilled it in your head that if your hands aren't on a keyboard, you're not valuable. And your brain is 30 times more valuable than your hands on a keyboard. Because you can do that, that is amazing. And that's the thinking, the conceptual thinking that needs to come out in group conversation because that's what makes things happen. Not that your hands on keyboard don't, but you know.
Right.
Yes, because I was almost going to say yes, and. I was almost going to say yes, and I was like, I hate that phrase. The Marty Kagan inspired book, that's one of the things he says in the book. Why would you not bring a developer to your discovery session? He's like, your developers are usually the highest paid people in the room. Highest paid people in the room.
Makes me smart.
And to expect that you're going to keep them out here in a corner and just feed them work, you know what I mean? Just like, just do what you're told and go. You're doing that with the most expensive employee that you have. So think about that for a second. And also think about the developer's job. They solve problems all day. They do nothing else than solve problems all day. Mm-hmm. So you're going to take the person that solves all your problems and be like, nah, you don't need to listen to this. You don't need to be part of this.
Yeah, it makes zero sense.
Like the hubris in that statement. Nah, you don't need to be involved in this. I got it.
It's almost like a bad actor. Oh, topics.
Oh, bad actor. Oh man, it's almost like I've never had a podcast where I don't cut straight into the topic intro to be like, today's topic is this, and then we start with the topic. But I think I want to leave banter for like 2 or 3 different things, and then the topic intro will be the fourth cut in the podcast. I'm kind of okay with that because it turns a medium of podcasting on its head. Although most people have stopped listening by now, so thank you for the 3 people that are still listening.
That's right.
There you go.
So thank you, Curtis, for coming to this week's AA session. I'll now
Am I
be
supposed to stand up when I...
No, don't stand up. Everyone will see that you're not wearing pants.
I know.
You're supposed to wear them?
Shh. It's tough to wear a vest and a tie and no pants. That'd be really weird. So the topic that I wanted to talk about today was something that's been bugging me ever since, Curtis, that you pointed out that all these people on LinkedIn, that their business model basically is to provoke outrage and get extra clicks and tweety tweets or whatever. A lot of them have good points, though, they've had bad experiences with Scrum. I don't know if they're good points. A lot of them have points. A lot of them... Here, let me back up. A lot of them have bad experiences with Scrum. A lot of people have bad experiences with Scrum. And because they had bad experiences with Scrum, and their experience with Scrum is the closest thing they've ever had to being in an actual Agile environment, they attribute agility and Scrum to the same bad root. There's something in here about what I'm trying to say.
No, there certainly is. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, it's the shock factor. And I even look back, if you point it to myself, I'd be naive to say that people haven't had bad experiences in Scrum not because of me. I'm responsible for someone that had a bad experience within Scrum or an Agile framework of any kind. I accept that fact, and there's probably someone out there that is speaking right now about, oh man, this guy, and totally get it, rightfully so, because I've made mistakes and I've grown from it. But then it's the same point of, so someone who does that for the sole purpose of doing the shock factor, all I want to do is just create a buzz, whether I even agree with that statement or not. Why is it Agile, and why am I on LinkedIn? Well, because I surround myself, the Agile cloud is just the easy low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And I can do it to get clicks. Well, I respect the person because he actually knows that I know what I need to get and I'm doing what I need to get it. So I respect him. Would I buy a car from him? Absolutely not. But you understand that the guy or person, just they know what they're doing. Do they really feel that way is my question. Help me understand that.
Yeah,
Do you really feel that way?
Yes, that would be the question. Do they really feel that way, or are they just trying to provoke outrage?
In a lot of cases, you'll never know, because you can't really look through the screen to figure out who they are. But you're right. A lot of times that's all it is. It's just getting click equity out there on different platforms.
Right. Yeah. Equity. Equity of name.
Yeah.
You know what sucks is there's somebody out there going, that's not thinking for themselves yet. And they're going, oh, this goes making a lot of sense. And then next time he goes into an Agile transformation or someplace that does Scrum, I hate this. It's like, why? Well, because this one time, and then it just goes. It's the same thing with society, the same mob mentality, right? Mm-hmm. There's somebody out there who's confused, doesn't know, and they're just like, yeah, this guy's making a lot of sense.
Well, I could see the same thing of, let's say you work somewhere and maybe they use Scrum, but they don't necessarily have a defined framework in mind. Like they don't necessarily have a defined, what is agility to my company? What does it mean? They don't really understand it at a deep level, so they're like, oh, we use Scrum, so we're Agile because we use Scrum. Right?
Dude, that's so common, right? So people go in and do this mechanistic thing called Scrum or whatever framework you want to choose, right? Without having the backdrop of business agility, the why behind it. It isn't just that we develop software in a different way. It goes beyond developing software. It's pervasive throughout the organization. It's what we've talked about in the past as enterprise business agility. So many companies don't really think it through that way. Right. It's business as usual in accounting, HR, marketing, sales, etc. Yet in IT, we're Agile because we're just doing these things. We're doing the events, and that's it. We've got it. And when it doesn't work, they go, all right, it didn't work here. They won't try it again because, again, you've got the naysayers that say, oh, yeah, that Agile thing, we tried it a couple of years ago. It didn't work. It's not for us because we're special. We're unique.
Yeah. Well, those people are protecting their own turf. Out of everything we're about to talk about, they probably have the weakest case, the people that are protecting their own turf. Right? Now, so people, I guess we're going into why people resist. That's kind of the subcategory here. Why people resist. I guess you can call them bad actors, but bad actors assumes that they have an intent. They may not necessarily have an intent. They just might be like, oh, this Agile stuff's a fad. And I've been developing for 20 plus years, and Waterfall works great for what we're doing. I'll give you an example. An example was the big data platform that I worked on. The big data platform, the leadership, and honestly, like the higher up developers in that program, who, by the way, were all data modelers. This is their background. That's, so grain of salt. They were all like, it makes no sense to do this Agile. It makes no sense to split it up into small chunks and deliver small chunks to the customer, because unless the customer has all of their data transformed and loaded and modeled in line with everything else, so it's all equal and deduped, and all the data's all cleaned up and stuff like that, they're not going to migrate from their platform to our platform, because they had an in-house platform in the data platform. So the delineation of when you stop using your own in-house homegrown product and start using our product that we created for you, when that happens, that's a moving goalpost. When that happens.
It shouldn't be, though.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Right? It doesn't have to be, is what I'm trying to say. It's only a moving goalpost because of the way people are thinking about it. Right? They're thinking, well, we need to get the whole thing ready before people will start consuming it. What happens when you get the whole thing ready and they get their first look at it and they say, yuck, we don't like it? But what happened to the idea of mocking things up and giving them just enough?
Yeah.
Let's say the new platform needs a full payload of something. It's a message. Mm-hmm. The team can only build, let's say, the first 5% of it. So don't give them the 5% because they can't even consume that. Give them the 100% with 95% of it mocked up. It's not real. Ignore it. Focus on the 5%. Does the message get consumed in its entirety? Next sprint, add some more and keep doing that, right? It's not rocket science, but people just haven't been used to thinking about it this way. So I guess what these guys that we're calling bad actors with or without intent, part of it's not their fault. They grew up working in the old-fashioned model. Mm-hmm. And they just haven't been exposed to, I guess, the newer way of working. I don't know how many years Agile's been around, but it's still newer compared to the old way of working. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, when they see a bad experience working with Scrum or Agile, they immediately go back to what they know. Right?
Yeah,
so it's kind of similar to the episode where we talked about the attitudes of people that say, you must be in the office. If I can't see you working, you're not working.
Yeah.
Because that's how I grew up as a manager or leader. It's the same thing here, I think.
Fair assessment, do you think? Agile to the business world is what crypto is to the financial world. People are still resistant, naturally so. I'm scared because of certain things. There's certain things that is going to make me feel uneasy. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the same thing in the natural world, it doesn't come without drawbacks. It really does. But you're going to have detractors, and same thing in the crypto world. There are going to be people that drag their feet that never approach it, while other people see and take advantage of the glorious benefits that it offers. They're going to have some people that just are absolutely refusing because it gets them out of their comfort zone, the safe world that they once knew. Why I like real currency. Why? Well, because guess what? It's insured by banks. Well, there are ways that crypto can be tracked that money can't be, which is why there's money laundering, why you have digital forensics teams that can track crypto through multiple wallets. So when it gets stolen, there was somebody the other day that had like 600 Bitcoin, and it turns out they tried to use it somewhere, and it was for 2 years dormant, and they found it. And they somehow tracked them, and they immediately locked that person up. There's a resistance to it. As Om said, right or wrong, it's the safe area. The difference is, and this is what I've always asked, they go, should we go Agile? Do you care, and could you benefit enough from getting feedback along the way to be able to change your product to make sure that you're building the right thing? Because in some instances not. And you talked about data. I once worked on a project where it didn't make sense, and the only reason is because all they were doing from the back end was changing to a star schema model from, I forgot what the old flat files, calling like crazy. It didn't do anything different. The system didn't function any different. And I'm like, well, could we take a step along the way to show that? They were like, no, because what we're doing is we're going to do that, and then this model is going to be shaped to where if they want to do something, the data is at their fingertips. I just got to point them in the right direction. Take this customer ID, and you get 27 different data points for any one customer. And that's something where I'm like, I could see that, because along the way, I'm not giving it to you for feedback, because I just need to have it accessible. And then whenever you want to build more features, Then we'll go along your agile process. Oh, I can give you this, but I can only get 27. I would great if I had this one other thing. Okay, well, we'll adjust the star schema so that it pulls in that extra data point. Does that make sense for you? Or this data point can actually be joined through this star schema to call this other star schema, and then therefore it daisy chains and gets you what you need. You don't have to create any flat files. Yeah. So I think that's the question is, do you need the feedback along the way? And if you don't, or you don't see the value in it, make a decision. I think that's where the bad actors come from. Is one, we talked about it last week, fear. There's a fear involved in getting out of your comfort zone, but there's also the key underlying part of Agile is the incremental delivery. Do I need feedback along the way, or if it doesn't matter, there is no change to this. I don't care even if you say you don't want it. I'm going to continue with doing what I'm going to do. Yeah. Then I would say, don't force yourself into an agile world if you don't really care. That's one of the biggest principles. I'm going to respond to the change. If you have evidence right in front of you that you need to change and you're saying no, don't do it. It's not worth it. You're just trying to fit into a slot and use the word for no reason. You have to appreciate what you got, the data you got in front of you. And if you don't do it. Fair assessment or?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think some people will say, well, look at Steve Jobs. He never asked anybody before he created the iPod, right? Which is true. He didn't do any focus groups. He basically came out and said, look at this thing. Now you can carry all these songs in this little device. The market was ripe for that at the time. He was pretty much at the leading edge. You don't have that anymore. Now it's cutthroat competition. So if you're not adopting quickly through the feedback you mentioned, your competitors are going to eat your lunch. So it's an unfair kind of comparison when they look back to all those years ago to something that was basically groundbreaking. There's not a whole lot of things like that are groundbreaking. You could say maybe lately, look at Elon Musk, maybe. You can look at that and say he came out with a product that was groundbreaking, and then now people are following, catching up, still playing the catching up. Yeah. So these guys are in a league of their own, and you can probably count them on one hand. It's not that many compared to the millions of organizations that are out there. So if you're working in one of those people's organizations, great. But if you're not, which most people aren't, then you need to think about getting feedback and be customer driven.
Can I ask a question?
Cool.
Two questions on that. So one, you mentioned Steve Jobs. In the iPod thing, I think he took a risk, but I also think, God, he made this for himself, and there's enough people like him. I mean, he was a music just. He loved Beatles, he loved Dylan, he loved everybody. Sure. I mean, the reason why it was so successful is because he knew in his mind he was making it for himself, but he knew how many people appreciated music the way he did.
He certainly saw the use case.
He knew what he wanted because he was that. Now, there's so many times when you are not the user. He got lucky, and the only reason I'm saying is he got lucky is because there's enough people out there that they're making products that aren't for who they are as a person, but he was just there.
Yeah. You're right about that. I think before that, Sony came out with the Walkman. That was the first foray into portable music. You could carry your cassettes with you and listen to them. Right. There's very few groundbreaking innovations like that now. There were a few back then. Now it's like really few. Yeah. Right now, most people are just taking something and spinning it.
I happen to know something about the subject, only about that much, because Steve Jobs, he had the benefit of knowing the market fairly well. Probably because he was a music guy. He had the benefit of knowing the market well, and he already had seen what Napster kind of had starting to decimate. He saw the digital market was becoming a thing, and that probably kind of pushed up in his mind that this is something that's needed. So he was just more in tune with the market than other people were.
He was asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not every CEO does that. When he was CEO and lead designer and lead product.
This is like the opposite of the why people resist category of like, why do people go all in this category? This is a big part of working backwards, the Amazon book. This is a big part of the Amazon book is most companies would never cannibalize their successful product. Okay, cannibalize meaning, in terms of what I'm talking about, meaning, I'll use a trucking analogy because this is something we actually did. So a truck driver drives around the country. They have a big packet of paper. They still to this day have a big packet of paper. Got to get signatures, whatnot, on paper, right? Still to this day. When they stop at a truck stop to get fuel, like they have to, sometimes they have designated truck stops because their company makes deals with different chains or whatever to fuel up for a discount. At those different truck stops, the software company partner with the truck stop, says, hey, we'll put a computer, a scanner, our software. It'll be like a kiosk mode where it's like you're locked out from going anywhere, fooling around with it. And it lets you quickly scan your paperwork, and you put in who you work for. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you have an ID, or I don't know what you have. Your email address, whatever it is, right? You put in your ID, you put in the company you work for, and boom, it sends the paperwork that you just got hot off the press to your home office. That was the software that kind of made the company. For years, made the company. This is back when everyone had like server racks and whatnot, back in the day. And then over time, the company was like, well, it would be better to have a mobile application where the driver just goes to wherever they have light. It could be the cab of their truck if they got lights in the cab of their truck or whatever, and they just take a picture of each page. It's not a ton of documentation. It's like three or five. And they take pictures of the documents. The flash might be good enough, right? But otherwise, you might want to be in a lit location. Take pictures of your documents, and then through your phone, you just send them up. Now you don't have to stop at a truck stop. You just take them with your phone. The company probably waited to create a product like that because they're like, well, if I let the drivers scan with their phone, I have really great resolution, high res images that the clients are used to getting from these truck stops with these high res scanners that I've invested as a company. The company invests, they paid money, they do maintenance. So there's money tied in that business. There's prediction numbers, there's revenue numbers, there's the rate at which drivers use them, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. There's like regular business, real business metrics. So now I'm going to introduce a new product, people scanning from the cameras. Like, are they going to screw up the pictures? Are they going to have to retake them? Is that going to cause billing to drop? So the reason I told that story was because when they created the mobile product, they were seriously thinking about like, well, how is this going to affect our other products? Is it going to take money basically away from us, a stable product? And maybe it'll be a crappier solution and people won't like it as much, but we'll still have the other solution, but maybe they won't use it. Who knows? I mean, who knows what it is? The point is, most companies would look at their product offerings and be, I'm not introducing a new product that in any way, shape, or form cannibalizes on the product that I have that's keeping my company alive. Not going to touch it. Not even going to enter that market. Amazon is basically the opposite. What can I do now to propel me into the future? What does the future look like? And the interesting thing about that book is I think we talked about this before, like their management salary caps at like $160,000 or something like that. And any compensation in and above that is given in Amazon stock. So the idea is, you as a leader, we're talking about executives, like top executives. You as a leader, where you will make your money is being invested in the long term, because they're trying to avoid, again, going back to this Deming thing, they're trying to avoid this management class of like people breezing in like, oh, I was successful on that. We had a guy in the data platform that was like this. I was successful in this other product, so I'm going to come over here and fix you guys and implement some other strategies that I did in my other product. But like, this product has nothing to do with your other product. And these teams are completely different than your teams. So the strategies you used over there, you can't just roll them out over here. These are different teams.
Or at least assume that they'll work.
Yeah, he did assume, and then I think he's gone from the project too, but I don't know how long he lasted on that. But the point of bringing this up is like, it's the opposite of why people resist, is how are people successful. I think the people who are most successful are the people that are looking out to say, what happens when this product is gone? What's next in the future? And they're driving the company towards that.
That's a new level of thinking, almost disruptive thinking that you're highlighting. Amazon.
It really is, yeah.
Comes from that. But yeah, majority of the companies out there, to your point, are looking for that ROCE, or return on capital employed, or there are other metrics like that on a product line. It hasn't paid back for all the investment we've put into it. That's one thing. The other thing is, it's stable. It's keeping the lights on. Let's not disturb that.
Right, yeah.
And that's counterintuitive to this whole disruptive idea that, yeah, it's making money, but what else can we be doing, right? Let's just set the trend instead of following the trend.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned sunk cost fallacy, and Amazon's actually guilty of that. So they were forward thinking on almost everything, and their ventures giveth and taketh away. Mm-hmm. Was it 2016? A lot of people don't know this. Microsoft Azure, the cloud offering, was not long, less than a year from folding. They had like 10-15% market share, maybe at most. Mm-hmm. I only know this because I had insider knowledge of how much it actually had, because I knew someone that worked there. Yeah. And they were losing because AWS had just a better solution all around. Their monitoring was 20 times better. Their auto scaling was 20 times better. Yeah. Amazon then announced that, hey, we're getting into the food game. Whole Foods. Yeah. Bang, bang. They bought them. They're single-handedly responsible for fueling ADO or Azure because what they did by purchasing that is they made businesses who were competing against Whole Foods saying, I'm not putting my stuff, we're ripping everything that we had in Amazon Web Services out. I'm not giving my data to Amazon. Mm-hmm. I'm okay, Whole Foods is one thing, but now that you got Whole Foods, I'm not going to go there because we're having compete. Like, you have my data. You can use that for whatever you'd like to. No, right. Sorry, ADO, I don't even care if it's bad. I want Azure. And that's how people gave it to Azure. Now, Azure, with Satya there, it reinvested in the product, and they got lucky because their product was inferior in every way, shape possible, and it was going down. Yeah. And Amazon wanted Whole Foods, and I'm sure it's worked out great for them. But, I mean, cloud computing is a very lucrative business. Yeah. There's not a lot of people that stay in the game. I mean, a couple of the local shops here in Tampa have been pushed out on it. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because they wanted that so bad, they didn't have the thought process behind what that would do. Yeah. I'm getting in over here. This almost basically killed this other product. Our only competitor was getting ready to drop out, and we were just going to seize the market. And they gave them the full house. They handed it right to them. And as soon as that, I mean, every big name company, I mean, I believe Walmart, I know a couple of other C-stores. I mean, they basically said, if it's Amazon Web Services, we don't want it. And it had nothing. They do not need our customer data because of their interaction with Whole Foods. They own Whole Foods, and we're not giving them that data. That was literally, they didn't even care how good it was. They weren't going into conversations with, what does this offer me technically over Azure? They just said, I don't care. And isn't that crazy? I mean, you can make that decision where it's in every way, shape, or form, it should be good for our product, but it's not. It's the opposite. Yeah. So they were agile. They just were, I don't know. I think, what is that? What do you do in that?
I think that's a good call. I keep referencing this diagram. I think it's out of one of Deming's books, and that's why I can't find it. But it's a diagram it says input, output. It's like a black box. I can't remember. And then it has, on the bottom, it has the environment. And the environment is a variable that can change. Like, your inputs and outputs can stay the same forever. But if the environment changes, it alters what comes out of your output without you doing anything. So you need to make up for the environment changing around you. And the implication here is that the business conditions have changed. For example, in the 70s, when American car manufacturers put all kinds of emission stuff on their cars and basically made their cars like horsepower go to garbage or whatever, and like big boxy cars with giant bumpers and stuff, and American consumers are like, these cars are terrible. I don't want to buy them. Or in the 80s, when the people were buying imports because the import cars were just way more reliable and didn't break as often. In this example, the environment is the market in that example. But the environment also includes a bunch of regulations and other things, outside factors that are pressing in on your company.
But in that example, though, one of the things that happened back then is it wasn't just that the consumer said, okay, we don't like these American products and we like the imports. It wasn't quite like that. Initially, the imports were terrible. So I remember back in the day, Datsuns and all these kinds of vehicles were really bad. Yes. But what happened is this: they listened to the customer and they adopted really quickly. First of all, Datsuns were very unreliable to begin with, but they were cheap. Mm-hmm. And then they built up on the reliability while still keeping them cheap. Yeah. So that increased the uptake in the market. Yeah. And then what they did, as everybody knows now, right? What they did is they said, we're going to go up from here. So now what they did is they rebranded and came out with the luxury segment of the market that was previously the purview of the Germans. Mm-hmm. They invaded that. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be learned from this. And now the new wave of that is happening, right? Which is the Koreans are coming up with those things, and the Chinese aren't far behind with the wall industry? And yes. Oh yes. Yeah. Have you seen the new products from Kia, for instance? Kia Hyundai? I mean, they're pretty nice. Last year, I believe, a Kia won car and trucks automotive vehicle of the year.
Really?
Yeah, and then it was followed
car
up.
driver?
Car and driver. Sorry. Yeah, and
There's so
then
many.
the other
Motor
one
Trend,
was
car and what are we,
Bronco.
Consumer
So now
Report?
the Ford is coming into it too.
That Bronco's sweet.
So yeah, it is sweet. Yeah, I agree. But yeah, so it's an interesting model to look at, right? Because it's not just the cost. It's not only the cost. It's targeting the market and going after it. And now the Chinese are doing that.
Yeah. We'll see if they're smart enough to understand the environment of the what Toyota and I don't know if any other manufacturers. I know Volkswagen did as well. I'm not sure the rest of them, but they rebranded to have like Toyota of America, Volkswagen of America. You know what I mean? Where basically they're getting around tariffs by having the cars that are actually produced here.
Their Honda did that initially, right?
did
By
it?
having their factories here in Tennessee. Now you've got Volvo doing it, right? You see Polestar, it's a Volvo, but it's now called Polestar. Most of it's assembled here, therefore it's an American brand. 'Cause
Right.
parts come from everywhere, but it's assembled here.
Yeah.
So you're seeing this thing now, right? And the next wave is electric vehicles that you're going to see
I'm all
companies
for it.
that aren't even
100%.
known as household names right now. In 5-7 years, they're going to be new players in this space.
Well, when the Chevy Volt came out, everybody was making fun of it. But now I see quite a bit of them out there, and I'm like, I don't know if it doesn't sound. I mean, you can get into the game early, but you can also not be wrong. Let's say it like that. Being in early is not the same as being wrong.
I wonder how car models are created, like from inception, created, carried through, engineered, built, and stuff like that. I wonder if the Volt has its own team and a designated factory. You know what I mean? With
It has to, right?
To think about it, like I wonder if they have their own like scaled Volt team. I wonder if they have if it's a self-contained unit or it's just part of the larger ecosystem. It's just another car or whatever. Some brand manager has like, I got the Impala and the Volt and the Cruise and the whatever. Or I wonder if it has a dedicated team that just does.
I think today it's the latter. I'll tell you why. Because you no longer have a small electric vehicle, right? Which would be the case if it was just a general mix of product. Now you have a small electric vehicle, a larger electric vehicle, a pickup truck, a luxury electric vehicle. So they're actually extending the breadth of the product line. So I think it's a dedicated, in most companies at least, most car companies, it's a dedicated unit, the EV unit, right? I believe that's the case today.
Well, and then you also get the hybrid. So you probably, like you said, you have a brand manager, and the brand manager, it's probably done by per plant, right? Because each plant is set up to only produce a certain number of cars because the line is there. So it's not like you have a bunch of Honda manufacturers here, and here. This is a factory that just does the Civics because it's easier to maintain all of these machines. If they're all making the same product, it's there. Well, you've got your Civic gas, you've got your Civic hybrid. I mean, and then you've got to think of like brand manager. Does it make sense? And this is where we're going back down to manager styles is. I would assume that the customer is so different in what you need in a Accord gas model versus an Accord hybrid model, because I would probably never go a hybrid. Is that two separate managers? Because they're separate needs, separate cars.
Yeah. I'm interested now in, are they all produced in the same place and just change out components? I'm interested because I don't know. Another theme of the podcast we keep going back to is the distributing control. I'm not really ready to jump to self-organization / self-management, but this seems to lead into a tenet of self-management. If you decide, all right, Curtis, welcome to GM. You're going to take over our new electric vehicle initiative now. I want you to design an electric vehicle. We'll give you a plant that's going to make it. We'll give you a certain amount of budget to hire people and to maintain staff to do the design work, to produce the first version of the car. Once the first version of the car is out there, you get it out there, you start shaking it down, figuring it out, you get some feedback, bring it back to the design team. They'll make iterations of the car, and then we'll have the next year's model and the next year's model or whatever. You know, because a car model is like a living thing. As you put models out there, you take feedback and you go back to your design team and try to improve it or whatever. And not just a customer. You talk with everybody. You talk with the people actually manufacturing it. You talk with your part suppliers. You know what I mean? You talk with everyone. Like manufacturing is just like a giant quagmire that we can talk about agility all day long because like the roots of all this stuff is in manufacturing. So it would make sense. If it's like that, it makes total sense to me. Knowing that all the car manufacturers are all giant mega corporations, I'm like, I'll bet you they mess this up big time. I'll bet you it's like one dude who has like 8 car lines and they all report to him and he all has different teams and they're all like 20% of the cars are done at that factory and 40% at that factory and the rest at this other factory. Unless you're doing overseas distribution, then it's in this country or that country. It's like, you guys have really made this a lot more difficult than it really should be to manage these efforts. I think about a product. It's like, if I'm going to go back to the platform, go back to the data platform I was talking about earlier. In the data platform, you're consuming different data sources, okay? Mm-hmm. And you have to have experts in those data sources. Let's take Salesforce, for example. It's a data set that everyone's going to know. Look, if they don't know it, they understand that it's a big data source. It's a big database. It's not really just a database. But anyway, for the purposes of this, it's a big data source, right? There are people who just purely are Salesforce engineers that just work in the Salesforce database, changing things and adding things and hunting through things in the data to get you what you need in reports and whatnot. If you take somebody like that, their expertise is in that data set. So it would make sense for them to be with whatever products you have that touch Salesforce. We're getting dangerously close to component teams here, but
we are.
That's not the point of this. The point of this is I have applications. Whenever those applications interact with Salesforce, again, going back to my experience on the data platform, the team that did Salesforce, they did other data sets as well. So that those people worked on several things, but a specific team owned interactions with Salesforce. That's kind of why I brought this up. It's getting weaker the more I talk about it.
No, it's holding together. I mean, you could use SAP as your example.
Same thing,
right? So yeah,
same thing.
Yeah.
Actually, SAP. I'm glad you brought that up because I have experience with that as well. But people that work with SAP doing SAP development, they will get in a knife fight with you before they let anybody else get. They will guard that with their lives to be like, no, you have to go to the component team that only does the SAP development. I'm like, it's basic database development. It's not anything special. Like, what's no, you got to go to the SAP team.
Is that because they're a bunch of overpaid prima donnas? There, I said it.
I don't.
Get on LinkedIn with that. You're gonna have some followers.
I don't know, man. I think
bad actors.
I think the purpose of this, the higher level topic was why do people resist? We talked about the pivot of this, which is why do people push it forward? If we go back to like why do people stop it from happening? In the bad actor category, I've got two different people in the bad actor category we could talk about. Number one is middle managers who basically are being left out of the transformation effort. In most of the transformations I've been part of, middle managers don't get trained. They don't know what they're supposed to do. Actually, through the transformation, it looks like they don't really have a job coming out of the other side of the transformation because they're like, oh, your team members are all going to be dedicated to these teams, and you're just going to basically hire people to go onto the teams until an HR person can figure out how the team hires people, and then we don't really need.
Yeah.
You don't really have a defined job, so I can understand a reason to resist it. And the other people that would resist it would be people whose job clearly does not exist after the transformation is over. Like, for example, if we were a waterfall shop and we're staffed with all project managers who do the budgeting and do whatever, and then on the flip side of that, when all my products have product people at the helm and they're in a product office for their discipline, I don't need the project managers anymore because I'm not doing projects. Maybe I need a couple of them.
Right.
I don't. Yeah, basically,
I
don't need the project management office anymore. But
doesn't it highlight that?
Yeah.
All the transformation is doing is highlighting. No offense to anyone out there. Don't take it. All the two people out there. One person's going to be upset. The waste. Right? With self-organization comes identification of lean principles. You are seeing waste. And all it does is puts this shroud that used to be hiding behind waste and puts it out there.
Yeah.
But in the most successful transformations that I've been a part of, it's not you don't have a job and there's the door. It's in this new way of working, judged by what I know of you and how much you want out of people, you would be an excellent candidate with some training to be a Scrum Master.
Yeah.
It does change what you do. So you need to make a decision on if that's you or not. Mm-hmm. From the qualities that I see in you, I think you could be an excellent Scrum Master. Or you're so good with being a product-facing person. You're good with people. I think you'd be an excellent product owner. It starts you slow and then obviously builds you up, but you could own a product. You wouldn't have to do all this micromanagement stuff anymore. Just focus on product. Keep doing what you were doing, just come with a little bit less on one side. If you think that you go through a transformation and nobody has to be separated from the company, either one, you're in cotton candy land and bring me in there, or you're just being naive. It happens. There are so people that are resistant that is like, this is the job that I want, and respect it. If that's the job you want, that's great, but the company is making a shift. You have to understand that. However, if you really do like this company, you like who you work with, I mean, you even, there's another way you could approach it. Here's what an SM is, here's what a product owner is. What sounds more enticing to you? And they say product owner. You say, well, I've got the resources to help you out. Not people. I have actual resources, training videos, things like that could help you understand what it means to be a product owner. And then you make the call, because I think you'd be an excellent person. You've been here so long. Let's get you out of that line leader and make you a product owner. Yeah. That's how you transform, because you're helping them with change, because it's not easy. But sometimes it's just people, that's their job. They want to be a line leader. That's what they like doing, and there is a market for that. But in a transformation, you have to understand at some point you have to call it what it is and say, that position just no longer exists here. Yeah. And if that's what you like doing, I'm sorry, there is no test manager. We don't need test managers. Everybody has testing. Everybody can test. So we don't need someone to manage that.
I don't know if we specifically hit this on our last podcast that we did.
Was it like step 7?
It was somewhere way, way deep in there, which was basically when you come up with a vision, you have to have the courage to communicate that vision to everyone. And if the true part of the vision is years from now or whatever, or on the other side of this transformation, we won't have project managers, and you're talking to a project manager, just talk to them about what it means and be clear about, like, don't be like, hey, one day you're gonna wake up and you won't work here anymore. Like, you'll never know. Like, that's not the way to come across. It'll be like, look, we'll take care of you. If you want to stay here and you want to, change your skills that you bring to work or whatever, everyone likes working with you, we can find a place for you. But if you would rather keep doing your Gantt charts and keep asking when things are going to be done and having it be wrong continuously forever,
it's their choice at that point. But I'd say go a little bit beyond that and not just say we can use you by training you in some other role, etc. Engage them early in the transformation. So let them know ahead of time. Things are changing for all of us, right? And for you specifically, we value your input on A, B, C, D, E. Be part of the transformation. That way, they're more likely to be engaged rather than sit back and go, I don't know about this. Right? I don't know if I'm going to be working here. On the side, they're looking for work. You don't want that to happen.
Do you think they're on the side they're looking for work? I feel like they're in the corner going, how can I kind of sabotage this?
But there's that too.
Because it does happen.
Let it blow over.
Yeah, sit back and watch. Yeah, that's right. Any of the above can happen. But my point is, if you engage them early, then there's a chance that they will be with you through the transformation. There's a greater chance, let's just say. That doesn't guarantee anything, but at least that way they feel like, okay, my voice was heard, somebody reached out to me, right? As opposed to, well, here we go. They're now offering me training. I don't know how long they'll keep me for even after that. There's the naysayers, right? So yeah, I've seen that happen a couple of times where people were brought in ahead of time and they became part of the transformation. So what do you not like about what you do today? Let's change that, right? And you're going to be a pivotal person in this transformation.
What if you framed it like this? Hey, PMs are not, but what happens when you do something wrong? I get yelled at, I get scared, and say, the company's going to a way where fear is not the motivating factor anymore. You have the chance to be a product owner, and guess what? When you mess up, it's okay. I promise you it's okay. Because why? There's a whole lot of new product owners. You're right where you need to be. Doesn't that, I mean, that sounds, and you frame it in that way because you basically, it's not creating a sense of urgency. It's creating that level ground. There are not these seasoned product owners that are there not messing up. You have peers that you nurtured this company for so long. Big name company XYZ with a bunch of project managers. A lot of those project managers, they want to keep, so they transform their jobs. It's like, look, you're right there with your peers. Every mistake you're afraid of making now, that's going to happen. It's going to be on the table, and it's going to be okay. But if we keep going down this path right now, do you really want it where if any mistake is made right now, you get yelled at and you're scared of getting walked?
Yeah, the former is a much better approach than what I've seen, though, which is we're going to keep our project managers, but there are no project managers in Agile, so we'll just call them Agile project managers, right? I've seen that happen.
That makes sense. All right.
And then they wonder why things aren't working well.
I
But
like
yeah, I like that. I like that framing approach.
I like.
Well, it's the human element.
It's
Yeah.
well, what you're pointing out is not something to be taken care of with management. That's a leadership approach.
Correct.
To the problem. Like we talked about this on the last podcast. It's like Jeff Bezos is like, oh, you just failed to launch my. I can't remember what it was, Prime or whatever it was. Like the first shot at streaming. The first shot at streaming. Oh, you just failed to launch streaming or whatever. Like why? Oh yeah. Why would I fire you now? Because the dude went into Jeff Bezos. I keep wanting to go Jeffrey Bezos. I can't stop myself from doing it. And he went into Jeffrey Bezos' office, and he's expecting to get fired. And Jeff Bezos is like, I'm not gonna fire you. You got to get out there and make the streaming platform successful now. Like you just failed to launch it. As a product person, I just spent all this money to give you all these learnings. Now that you failed doing things the wrong way, now get back in there and do things the right way. Mm-hmm. That's a leadership mindset. That is not a manager's mindset. Like a management mindset is one of control and of mitigating losses. And I can attribute the losses to you, Ohm, and I'll write them off on the Ohm budget. And when I fire you, the losses go away with Ohm because I fired him.
It's the blame game, right? It's the blame mentality.
Yeah, but it all goes on the same ledger.
I understand.
Like there's no,
Sure.
It doesn't go away with it. Like,
Let's hear a buzzword. What's the phrase or buzzword that goes off in your mind when you realize that the blame game is still in effect? You're sitting in a meeting and you're like, we're in the middle of a transformation, but you still see that archaic thinking. What's like there's a phrase that comes to mind for me.
Oh, I understand.
I'm like, oh, you're still looking for
control.
You're still looking for control.
Yeah, control,
What's a phrase for you that like sticks out? Like if you can tell someone's still looking for control.
Oh goodness.
Let Ohm think about that for a second.
Yeah,
because I will tell you, like now that I'm a product person full time, I'm on a different side of the table when somebody comes up with the blame game, basically. Because usually people come up with the blame game. Usually people coming across with blame are looking to absolve themselves of something or to make to pull themselves beyond reproach, right? They're trying to protect themselves. And that, like a product person, like the person that like controls the money, basically, that doesn't work at all with me. At all, because like what are you going to go to war with? Like metrics that don't exist, velocity metrics. I'll be like, I don't care. Like I don't care that we were producing the most efficient Yugos at our most efficient Yugo factory in the world.
They're still Yugos
that nobody wanted to buy. Like right. I could care less. Show me the experiments that we tried. Show me the entrance of the market that we tried to make and that we failed. Or why did we decide that we were going to go all in on this specific strategy? I'm much more interested in that. And usually everyone who's sabotaging, like everyone that's in this category of resistors, product people, if they're willing to get in and fight with what I think of as agilists in the organization, but it really could be anyone. It could be anyone sponsoring change. It doesn't have to be just agile specific. If the product people are willing to get in and fight with these people, they can cut through a lot of that. Be like, look, we're not looking for blame. The fact that we did something wrong, fine. Like we did something wrong. How are we going to take this and prove that it's a learning and catapult to the next level? And usually the people who are looking to blame, they don't have any suggestions. You know what I mean? Other than go and do what we've always been doing.
Yeah.
Which, like the higher up in leadership you get, hopefully, the less and less that will be looked on.
There.
Yeah.
The less looking directly in the camera.
The less that will be looked on
Make sure
positively. Yeah, I can't.
The phrase that comes to mind as a control person looking at somebody who's supposed to be, you're partnering with these people. It's not us and them, but the phrase that comes to mind is, we're in a boat, but the hole's on your side, Brian. Right? It's your problem. Deal with it. It's your problem.
That's my favorite. I've sat in those conversations and I've seen people get animated with it and they'll go, the ticket came in and they'll go, whew, and then the person goes, it came in and we routed it back to you.
Oh yeah.
And then they just play tennis back and forth and they actually do that and they're sitting across and I'm like, this is a fun game that gets nowhere. Because you're just hitting the ball back and forth. My favorite thing, I think, that I like to hear is we want to put this person here and we call them the incident commander. And I say, okay, I'll play game. For what? It's one neck to choke. And I'm like, good God, you couldn't be more transparent with how Why do you need to choke a neck? Good Lord. One, if you had a tell, you just told your hand, because it's like, it's so crazy. But I've actually heard that multiple times, and I'm like, let's refrain from violent terms in the business world, because for what reason? I don't need it. I mean, I even proposed that, should we change to Scrum leaders? And they're like, for what? And I was like, I mean, I'm not affected by the nomenclature for master, but I'm like, I'll play game if that's what it takes. Mm-hmm. If somebody feels like that is a threatening term, sure, I'm all for it. And they're like, yeah, but you're the master. And I was like, if it makes someone have to try to look up to me or feel threatened when they hear that term, nah, I'm good without it. I don't care. You just call me the Scrum guy. I could care less. Yeah. I don't need fear. If it eliminates fear, I'm all for it, because nobody's going to talk to me if they're scared.
Yeah. When Fred was on, because he's a trainer, I asked him, I was like, hey, man, can I get a copy of the Scrum Guide where you retitle Scrum Master? So it goes along with the product owner. Can we retitle the Scrum Master to be the process owner? Ooh. And then it's very clear that you want to know something about how the process should work, you go to that person, and they'll tell you how the process should work. But then the servant leader part will kick in to be like, let's figure out where you're at, what the transition looks like to get you to where the ideal place should be, because it should inherently be, this person is the expert. I mean, that's probably why they title it Scrum Master in the first place. This person is the expert. Process. Yeah. Let's just go to the expert that we have in-house.
You just gave me a thought. Scrum enabler.
Scrum
titles, but I like it. I don't know why. Because you can't say process enabler, because it's bigger than a process. It's really, because if I were to say process enabler, then it's like, my next question would be, so that people over process thing, you really just, you know what I mean? Like it's so it's like Scrum enabler. So,
No, it's good. It's good. No,
you're cringing.
I'm smiling. I'm not cringing. I'm smiling because I actually have a play on words with those people that say to you, well, you're the master. And my immediate retort is, and you're the commander. But I'm with you on that, right? I think going forward, a couple of versions of the Scrum Guide, you'll probably see this change. Because I think lots of people are feeling this way with this word master. It's too onerous on the Scrum Master to be called a master, because the team should figure out stuff, and they're really a facilitator, all that stuff that we know, people over process, all of that. Mm-hmm. So really, are you a master? Or are you somebody who is basically a catalyst? Yeah. Right? So there's different terms you can come up with, and I think they will do that. I think they'll change the Scrum Guide.
What if a team member were to be like, and if they felt comfortable with it, what if they're just like, oh, who's your Scrum Master? Oh, you mean Dad? Dad. Because I've seen a company do that, where the team felt comfortable enough, they don't want to call him the Scrum Master because they think it was a weird title. And they said, you name me.
It is
Dad,
a weird
Mom
title.
And Dad. Yeah. But it's like, they're the voice of reason. They try to guide you. They don't do it for you. And when you need a little bit of nudge or help, they'll remove. I mean, kind of. It's a weird term to use in a business setting, but...
You want to know a weirder term? Gang boss.
Oh, God.
You know where that comes from. Wow.
Scrum gang boss. I like it.
Oh, my gosh. I've been at a place where they call their Scrum Masters, they've gotten rid of Scrum Masters, and they call them the tags. So they are the Agile guy or the Agile gal.
Oh, yeah.
And I got on board for a little bit, and then I took a step back and was like, were they doing it in a sense of, that's the Agile person? We're not Agile. You're going to hear it from them all day long. And they didn't actually do it that way, but from the outside in, that was my first question is, okay, so are they doing it as a kind of a tongue-in-cheek of they're all about that Agile stuff and we're over here we're kind of listening, but it wasn't like that. It was something that rolled off the tongue and it worked. So kudos to them. So I'm like, I've even thought it with my teams, it's like, look, we all probably kind of cringe the first time we heard Scrum Master. When I tell people I'm a Scrum Master, they cringe. So it's almost like a icebreaker exercise. You get to name me. If you say Scrum Master, fine, perfect. If you say SM, I'm okay with it. If you want to call me a project manager, that's a no-go. But we'll talk. You all get to name me.
Yeah, I like it.
It's a different icebreaker. You name me. You tell me what you want to call me. Yeah. And I'll answer to it as long as it's not derogatory or a project manager. Go ahead.
Again, or just, hey, you. Again, this is kind of like why I go back to process owner. Like, I like that because it like, the reason I like that so much, I don't know, I'm probably focusing on it a little bit too much. The reason I like it so much is because show me who else in the organization spends the majority of their time figuring out how to develop teams, how to get people working together, how to teach people who don't necessarily have skill at collaborating to work together to solve things as a team rather than take it and go off and sit in a corner by themselves for whatever amount of time. You know what I mean?
One might argue that a line leader tries to do that, but it's a little bit different.
Maybe.
You could argue it. In old school thinking, it's the people manager. They're like, and they do have rapport with the people. I mean, you can't deny it. They do. Some people could run off the bridge.
I don't think that's the role of the people manager. I think the role of the people manager has to do more with, I'm going to write down a specified list of instructions and give it to you, and then you carry out the instructions, like no thinking necessary. No thought necessary, no interpersonal communication skill necessary, no collaboration between people. Basically, no critical thinking on your behalf taken to the team level.
What about the arbitrary one-on-ones that you schedule every 2 weeks?
I really whiffed that one. Like I swung at that one and completely missed.
I'm challenging you just because I could see it. Because I've seen some line managers that if they're more KPI focused, right? They're outcome oriented. Most of them aren't. You're correct. They do it where it's like they're so ingrained with process. It's like when I talk about defining a process, I got to do steps for people. Yeah. That's not necessarily it. There's an outcome. I can see that. I can see where you're going with that. I'm just challenging you.
No, I can see where you're going. So to take that to where we're going with it, what I could see is, boy, I can't think of another way to say this other than just referencing the Spotify model, just to kind of quickly throw it out there. I can think of managers under the Spotify model to be like, you don't really sit on a team. You help as, and maybe the team does the hiring for people on the team, but you will sit on the panel and you will help vet out. Let's say, for example, you're a QA lead at a company. You don't sit, so you're like a QA manager, whatever. You can use whatever title you want, but the point is you're their subject matter expert in a QA and testing, right? You don't necessarily sit on one team, but you have a say over all of their hiring when it comes to people with the skill set of QA. You help all the teams who are hiring QA people onto their teams. And once people do hire QA people onto their teams, you help all of the QA people on all the different teams and help them make sure that their skill sets are evolving and make sure that they are learning new things and help them stay in touch with the latest and greatest that's going on in the world of QA or whatever. And maybe at the company as well. Maybe a bit of that as well if you're HR people are not shouldering that burden. Your typical, like what a typical normal company would call like a resource manager. It's sort of that, but it's taken to the next level where all of your people are distributed and you don't really own anyone. You're just like the first among peers throughout the whole organization.
So what about using a title like in that example, a QA coach or a Scrum coach or...
Yeah, that's true.
UX coach.
Yeah, for the corporate equivalent, because again, now we're interfacing with the legacy world as it was in 1913. I would call them a lead, is what I would call them, just to denote that like they don't sit on one team.
So I've had to do this because in one of my transformations, and it worked out really well. The buzzword around centers of excellence. So as the teams, you essentially line them up like this in straight line. So you have Scrum Master, PO, and then you have Dev, QA. And you'd want cross-functional teams, but sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. Not every Dev is going to QA. Some QAs are just amazing. So you get that. Well, before they were a resource manager. So you look at all your QAs, and when you have them around the bottom, you take this oblong shape and you draw a line around them.
Yeah.
And then above that, you circle, and then you put in there, and that's the QA coach. And it's like, okay, well, what would this person do every day? They're not on any one team. No, their job is to take QA left and right. We know as teams they have things that they have to get done. They have to do unit testing. They have to do this. They have to set level of testing. That QA lead is responsible for enabling the training to make sure they understand how all the automation happens, how to write test case as a company. And you're like, well, isn't that micromanagement? It is, except no matter what standards have to be met. There's financial companies have certain standards and everything. So you do the same thing with devs and in terms of an architectural lead. Devs are willing to provide what it is, but that architectural lead is to challenge them critically and have them understand. I understand what you're wanting to do here, but I have to give you our guidelines within how CISA says we can operate, because security is at our utmost importance. So you may want to, use this .NET framework. Well, guess what? You're using 4. It has to be 6. Why? Because 4 is outdated and no longer supported. So things like that.
That's not micromanagement. That's
excellence.
That's not I guess I got to take it back for a second, because what I'm describing in my headspace, it only scales to a certain level. Because think about it, like your typical development lead or architects like to do this a lot. How many teams can you be over until you just worn completely thin? You know what I mean? There's a certain amount of teams where you could scale. Okay, maybe 4 teams, and I need another QA lead to support the rest of my teams until we need to divide and get another. We're in the realm of scaling. Usually, I try to pivot hard left before we get to scaling on the podcast. I usually try to not, because people, once they get to scaling, people are already had a bunch of problems. But when you get to the problem of, I have teams and they're made up of my cross-functional team members, and I need a layer above them to basically a support layer, not a management or anything like that. I'm just talking about pure support. Hey, we need to develop this new product, and we want to do whatever automated testing in this language or whatever. None of my people on the team know that language. Okay, well, the lead knows it, so he's got to get with your people and train them or whatever, or help them understand where to go for training or what to do next or whatever. It could be anything. It could be a new person training on something that's new to the company. Doesn't really matter. That stuff's going to happen. The next level up, I think next level up, because again, I'm calling them leads. They're probably more senior people. That's why I have to say next level up. Not saying they're managers in any way, shape, or form. That layer needs to scale at some point. But also, something we didn't talk about, I was thinking about it when you were talking, your Agile coach now, or Scrum Master, right? This is where I think the appropriate organizational placement for the Scrum, an actual official hired Scrum Master, needs to be placed. I think that level is where the Scrum Master needs to be placed. Because even on the teams that I work at now, and most of the Silicon Valley companies, they don't have dedicated Scrum Masters. They have somebody on their teams doing the role of the Scrum Master, but then the organization's people are Google doesn't have Scrum Masters, ha ha ha, and I don't need them. But you're wrong. Google has Agile coaches, and that's what they do. They rock star into teams to see how things are going, give some pointers, maybe help people along or whatever, and then they bounce out and go to another team where they're needed. That's what I'm talking about with leads, development lead, a QA lead, maybe have an architect in there, whatever you have in that. I think HR should be in that bucket as well, by the way. They bounce into the teams, help them do whatever, bounce out, go to another team. Maybe they don't even live with them a whole sprint. Maybe they're distributed. But I think the Agile coach / Scrum Master lives at that level. They don't live necessarily at the lowest team level. Maybe if your team's new. I don't know.
I think it depends, because sometimes at the lowest team level, they do need guidance if it's not a mature team.
Yeah, maybe.
So, I don't think you can be dogmatic about it. So, but most teams that have been working in Scrum or Agile in some way, they can just run their own thing. And the Agile coach or a Scrum coach, they can be at that higher level. I agree.
Yeah, but if you attribute the process to that person, what is the process that we use? Okay, well, now at these coach level groupings, I can now select all of my Agile coaches, pull them all together in a session and say, what little changes to the process are we making here? You know what I mean? What little nuances are we seeing across all of our programs that are specific to our organization, and how can we move forward? Or maybe they're sharing best practices between them. You know what I mean? Maybe they're automating reports or whatever, and one Agile coach has figured out how to do it or whatever, and then maybe they can give the other Agile coaches a script, and boom, now they're way more efficient. Who knows? The point is, most organizations don't even get to where I'm talking about.
They don't. And from what you've just said, it makes sense to call them Agile coaches rather than Scrum coaches, because you're not limiting to just Scrum.
They're just Scrum Masters. That's my point. My point is they're just Scrum Masters. But if you're going to say, okay, cool, we're Agile now, and we're self-organizing, but I'm not going to hire Scrum Masters because I just have somebody on the team do that job. You basically could say, well, I'm not going to hire development leads. I'll just pick a random developer on my team to do that job. That sounds really ridiculous when I say it out loud. It's the same thing. Who's my expert at, again, inter-team communication, growing teams over time? You know what I mean? Who's my expert in whatever framework we use?
Can I play devil's advocate?
Yeah.
You mean who's that one neck to choke?
No. I mean, who is the person who has spent their career focused on these skills? I don't think it has to do with
that's a true statement. I don't think it's who's responsible for it. It's who's the person that's most qualified to get in there and assist the team, knowing that on the roadmap to success in our Agile journey, right? Agile is essentially our product back to the organization.
Right, yeah.
Knowing that what they're attempting to do is come up and be so efficient that they are no longer needed on their their time is better spent elsewhere. Because the argument there is, as you said, same thing with dev leads. Well, there's never a time, I mean, you could argue that there would be, but there's probably never going to be a time when a dev lead is not needed. Mm-hmm. There should be a time, if you truly help and the team stays as a solidified, you keep moving people in and out, yeah, sure. You're never going to get off that team because you got people coming in and out and in and out and in and out.
Right.
But if that team is a whole and that team has a solid product and that product has a solid roadmap, at some point, sure, your Google model works. Mm-hmm. But I would be very careful as soon as that team blows up where either their dev lead leaves or you take half that team and move them elsewhere, keep that Agile coach handy because they may have to say, okay, all right, now I'm the Agile coach. Or sorry, now I'm the Scrum Master. Nice. I was Agile coach before, I'm the Scrum Master again because we got to get our boundaries, right? Things have just changed and we got to get our legs back underneath us. Then, all right, 6 months from now, okay, we're walking again, we're a solid team. I think it's time that I step back, let you all find your way. I'll come back in a couple weeks. Yeah. You all are fine. You know how to do this. Yep. You essentially Miyagi'd them, and that's where you're at. And I think that's the piece that's different. Is I'm not sure that you'd ever not need a dev lead, and I'm not one for that. I'm one for a Scrum team member is a Scrum team member. But I think that's the part is a lot of Scrum Masters now, either the environment doesn't support that they can step back, or they're not willing to be so efficient that they work themselves out of a job. Because that's the biggest honor for me is updating the resume after doing my job and teams no longer need me.
I'll add another or to that statement. The third one, or they really are a one neck to choke because leadership, management really, are basically targeting that person for vanity metrics and everything that we know to be falsifying Agile, basically. Yeah. And that person's job it is to keep these people pacified with these numbers, volumes, and whatever else they're looking for.
He's infiltrated my life.
This is part of why I brought this whole conversation up because I don't understand why so many people have had so many bad experiences with Scrum, specifically Scrum. But again, when they say Scrum, they're attributing Agile to it, and then they're kind of bringing it along for the ride as well. And I'm like, well, what happened to you? Like, why did you have a bad experience? And when I dig in, usually it's like their implementation of Scrum was flawed from the beginning. Either they implemented some kind of framework like SAFe or whatever, but they just layer it over their current project management practices and change the titles, and they really didn't change anything. Or it was like one small department decided, like some developer or director of development was like, we're not gonna do documentation anymore. We're Agile now, and we're gonna eat pizza for breakfast at 7:30 a.m. and we can do whatever we want because that's what Agile is, right? They just had bad implementations. And they have horror stories, and they attribute that to everywhere else they go. So when you, the Agile coach, enters the equation, like you're already starting from a negative. You have to start by knocking down these, like, well, tell me about this specific instance, what you did and what you didn't do, and now let me. Well,
that's what as Fred always says. That says Scrum works 100% of the time, if you do it right, and that's the problem. Most people don't do it right, and then they say it doesn't work here. He always says that, right? But yeah, so that when that happens and you enter the equation as a coach and they say, well, we tried that, it doesn't work, or that's not for us. It may work somewhere else, right? But we're just so different. We're unique. And yeah, that's when as a coach you dig in and figure out why they're saying that, right? What was it that burned them in the past? Right. And you point out where they went wrong in the best way you can. And then you obviously come in with a new alternate, right? This is how you should try things. And let's just say if it doesn't work, we'll change it. So we're not mandating anything here, but I'm just suggesting you try these things. Yeah. And don't try 50 things at the same time. try a couple of things. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, see, that is what I'm talking about, falling under the purview of the process owner. Say, hey, listen, I know you tried different things in the past. Why don't you try this specific thing this way? Try it for 3 sprints, and I'll come to your event, and I'll help you through it. I'll work with your Scrum Master on your team or whatever, help you through it. And let's just try this, right? So you're giving them a suggestion. This is where I expect to be challenged. You're giving them a suggestion, but it's a suggestion. Like, you should try this, meaning now that I sit up here, like in my brain, think about it. The person giving the team a suggestion now sits up here with the QA lead, with the dev lead, potentially with the architect or whatever. You should try this for 3 sprints. And then tell me if you like it or not after 3 sprints. And I'll come in and look. Like, is it a suggestion anymore when you sit at that level in the organization?
It's verging on a mandate.
Is there a way to do it? Is there a way to do it where it's not a mandate?
Yeah,
and,
there is.
Is that part of the skill set of this person? Because again, like, I don't.
So yeah, they may be sitting there, right? But for the purpose of that period, 2 or 3 sprints, they can inject themselves into the team. They sit face to face with the team. So now they're saying, hey, listen, this is how we should do this, not me telling you how to do this.
Yeah.
I think that might be more of a palatable
Sorry,
approach.
I stare at the ceiling when I'm trying to get really creative, like hearing what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm actually like walking out of my head, and I'm like, think about it this way. Interaction with Steve Jobs, no different. Your product to the team is an agile world. You're asking them to give you something. So the people that are angry and detractors, right? What are they doing? There's no trust. And you're just another body that's coming in to make another suggestion. So I don't necessarily agree with the approach of, here's something you should try. Why don't you just try it for a couple sprints? Because at every time, right, are they going to be measuring? I mean, you're hoping to get something out of it. Or take the Steve Jobs approach, right? As Steve Jobs said, you create something cool. And this was when he created remember the old educational Macs that were colored and everything? Yeah. And he challenged the guy, and he said...
Apple IIs.
Was it the 2s?
Was it 2s or iMacs? The colored ones?
The IMAX,
before the iMacs.
The IMAX are the colored ones.
These are the ones that...
Talking about the box? The little...
You're talking about the box
with
with
the
two
big
floppy
eggs.
drives?
Yeah.
The 2s and the 2Es?
Well, so he
II,
did, and
yeah.
the guy had the monitor, the all-in-one.
Yeah.
And he had the speaker sitting on the side, and he goes, what do you think? And he goes, it's not quite right.
Yeah.
Okay. And he goes, here's a crazy idea. What if we put the speakers inside? And the guy goes, he made the suggestion, but the guy identified the problem, and Jobs went on level and said, I'm not any bigger than you. What if you did that? I like it. Let's try it. It's the rapport. I mean, you're never going to get anywhere if you don't build rapport. If you're just that outside consultant coming in and just making suggestions, for lack of a better term, you're the unpresent father.
Yeah.
All you are is there just to make suggestions and then leave, and then come back when at your own will. And kid's gonna trust the dad if that's the way it is. You're the guy that has to build rapport. If you're gonna be the unpresent father, it's because you have the rapport of being the present father at one point. It just doesn't work. I mean, in this new agile coach that comes in for a transformation that you've already been like, look, I can't come in the middle of the transformation. I don't have any trust with these people. We're starting back over. Why?
Yeah.
Because they don't know me. I'm going to come in and make suggestions. Why would they listen to me?
Right.
Why should they listen to me?
Yeah.
I just have a resume. That doesn't mean anything to them. I'm here to help them get somewhere. That's also what you would probably call the leadership approach. You might make the suggestion to them, but in reality, you're coming to that conclusion together. And when you have that rapport, then in a couple weeks, you might actually get good. It doesn't mean it's going to be the right outcome, but it's going to be a full-on suggestion where they can commit to something, not necessarily that they believe in, but because you two both came up with that solution together and they trust it.
Yeah.
The trust has to be there.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's not there. Why would they trust you? They have no reason to.
I kind of want to challenge you on this too.
Do
because,
it.
There are certain things that I am open to discussing and kind of talking through with team members. But then there are certain things that are off the table. Like if the team's like, we want to have 12-week sprints, the inner agile coach in me wants to say like, well, why do you think that? What do you think we can do in 12 weeks that we can't do in a week or 2 weeks or even 3 weeks?
Yeah.
And I want to kind of walk through or whatever. But another part of me wants to be like, that's ridiculous. And
that's not a sprint. That's a marathon.
We're not doing that. Like, that's off the table. Like the structure, again, back to kind of where I'm framing this, kind of back to where I was, of being the process owner is there needs to be some kind of guardrails. Like everything is not up to negotiation. Like this comes back to I took the sticky off, but this comes back to our thing about Agile coaches that are out there. Hey, buy my book. You can do whatever you want in your implementation of Agile. Whatever works for you. Hey, all the rules are out the window.
They should be trainers, not Agile coaches.
Can I go back to the 12-week?
Yeah.
Okay. So my first question would be, okay, we're committed to getting valuable feedback from the user. We'll say that you just suggested it to me, and you say, yeah, absolutely. How do we do that with a 12-week sprint? Because even though it's a 12-week sprint, we're still going to pause at the end of 2 weeks, and we're still going to show it. And I'm like, let's walk through that. Yeah. So if we're still going to pause and we're going to show it, where are we showing it? And they're going to say, we'll do it in dev. Okay, is it going to have enough data there? Yeah. Is it really the most useful time? Like, are we going to have to populate data? It's going to take a while to get that ready and working. Is it going to be tested? Yes, and yes. Then I would say, I'm game to do it once and let's see what happens. I would have to do it. I mean, because if they say, look, we're calling it 12 weeks. Yeah. But we're not really, like, because I'm not the product owner, so the product owner doesn't want to release it to production. If they can get behind it and they're good at it, but they're getting the feedback along the way and they're changing their commitment. Yeah. I would say, look, how do we take the feedback after that first 2 weeks and we change our commitment? Because if you're planning for a 12-week sprint, you've got 12 weeks of work. What is that feedback doing there? And you say, well, we're only planning for 2 weeks. Then I would challenge them of, so that means after that feedback comes in, you're going to jump in a room again and you do a planning. The only thing you're changing is it's a 12-week sprint, but you're doing the same number of Scrum events as you would if you broke it up in 2 week intervals. Go with them on the journey. You got to go to that next level, and that's the part. But you're right to challenge me, because like most coaches would be like, I'm just not going to go there. But my brain goes to, I'll play ball. Let's shake out that world. Let's create it. What's going on? Because then they're going to go back. Okay, you know that we got that feedback. Yeah. How do we change your next 10 weeks at that point would be left? How do we change that work? Yeah. Because you already committed to that a while back.
Or 1 week. I mean, we did a podcast one time where we talked about blowing apart all of the conventional Scrum events. I remember specifically we talked about the sprint release. We were like, well, what would happen if every time you finish a story, let's say you finish a story, I don't know, pick a number out of the air. Let's say you finish a story every 3 days and you had 100% access to the customer. What would happen if you got the customer on the phone as soon as the story ended on the sprint board and just did like a little ad hoc sprint review just for that story right there on the spot? Basically, you wouldn't need a big bang sprint review at the end of your sprint. You could do little ad hoc along the way, and the customer basically every couple days would be seeing real, actual working functionality in production.
If they could spare the time, that would be awesome. If
they could spare the time, right. Yeah.
But just to go back to the 12-week example, so as a coach, the one thing I would be on the lookout for is, and this has actually happened before, where somebody'd say, well, we can't do 2 weeks. We can't even do 3. We need 12 because we need to get all the requirements up front, get them all signed off so that we can deliver something, which is absolutely not Agile. So those kinds of things you need to be a little bit more firm on and say that's not quite right, because at the end of the 12 weeks we don't know if the customer's going to like what they see. We've not had any feedback. They don't know the requirements up front for 12 weeks. So I think it's got to be taken on its merit as to why they're saying that. But you're right to vet it all out, give them some rope to work with it, maybe for a sprint, try it out. If it doesn't work, but set that up as a condition, treat that as an experiment. Let's try this, but it's an experiment. If it works, good. If it doesn't work, we're going to do something different. We'll learn from that.
I think as we move on, it's more acceptable, especially with things like Twitch and streaming. A lot more people are getting into video games, even with VR. Like people think it's enamored, and now they're starting to do VR video games just simply because it's like, holy crap, this is so cool. I have yet to find an industry that is more open to an Agile process. And I understand that people get their minds made up in that, but you'd be hard-pressed for me to find out anything where people are so open to, let's put something in there and see if it works. And it is, quite frankly, an industry where trial and error, experimental, incremental pushes are happening. And the reason I'm going down this is because then the people that are the developers behind it can really get behind that. They live that. They do that in their off hours, and they're like, I'm all for it. I hate this game this week, and I love it next week. Why? Because they reverted the change that they made, but they tried it. Well, they're not just sitting on stagnation.
Right.
So I'm like, the reason why I bring it up is because, as you said, it's adapting over time. It's who you're working with. The 12-week sprint goes back to the same question that we've been asking is, do you want to try something? And are you willing and wanting the feedback from the user to understand if what you're building is right? Because that's a heck of a lot of money to commit to. $20 million over the next year and a half is a lot harder pill to swallow when it's the wrong thing than $300,000 for 2 weeks. Well, that's pretty high, but $300,000 for the next 2 weeks.
Well,
I can lose that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Again, this is why you need your product people engaged with you as well. Like whoever's kind of moving you along and figuring out your process and that kind of stuff. Like you need your product people to be in step with you, because that is a business risk. Of we know the right thing to do. Yeah. It's based on our assumptions, and we're just going to work for whatever time, translating to however many hundreds of thousands of dollars, without any kind of feedback or any kind of other outside opinion, and just trust us that we know what we're working on. Oh man, that's a tall ask to ask for your product people. Just like, have faith in the development team that we know what we're working on. We don't need to check our assumption about anything.
Right.
Ooh.
Yeah.
God, I mean, if you looked at my brain 18 months ago, and I think that's a pretty traditional waterfall project, maybe 12 months?
18, yeah.
12 to 18 months. My brain, 12 to 18 months ago, wanted something completely different than I want now.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet 12 to 18 months ago when the new Corvette body styles were out there, but now I've seen a billion of them. I don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't need another Corvette that I've seen on the street a billion times. So 12 to 18 months ago, probably not. I mean, there's very few things that I do want that far from now. So it's like, I can gather everything up front. And at that time, if I was able to push all that requirements gathering out in the next 2 weeks and make a functional product, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I can't.
Yeah.
I have to beat you to where I think you're going. I got to know what you want before you even know you want it.
Right.
To do that. And that's where, like you said, on one hand, and we alluded to this earlier, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, they did that, and it's lucky. It happens on one hand. Mm-hmm. The more solid process here, take the incremental build. I mean, literally, you want to build a website, you don't have to build a whole website. You really don't.
Yeah.
Get there. Know what your product's going to be, define it, and make it happen. I mean, in the only business that I can see that doesn't work is, like you said before, is automotive.
Yeah.
How would you structure that? If I'm working on next year's car, incremental development. Try something, do a speed test. Try something, do a road show. Try something, do this.
Right.
But the team that's working on pumping out the cars today, I'm okay with Waterfall. I'm not changing anything. I can't. Unless there's a safety recall to which I'm going back to square one in a Waterfall setting. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking for feedback on the vents and how you don't like them. I'm not changing this year's model. I'm going to do it for next year's.
Yeah.
We've used this sort of example, to your point, right, about building airplanes, for instance. There's a long life cycle there. Mm-hmm. And you're not changing things. You're actually not allowed to change things after something's been passed through regulatory, right? But you're still getting feedback. So those customers that you're targeting, you have to know that up front before you're building X number of aircraft. Bring them in, show them a prototype, maybe take them on a test flight, whatever it is. They bring their own test pilots, in fact, on the early prototypes. But you're not changing things radically. You're getting feedback. Mm-hmm. So that there's change on a longer scale, maybe. Mm-hmm. An example was one of the Middle Eastern countries ordered over 100 units of a specific model. And the only thing they changed on the early prototypes and the test flight was the distance between two armrests. Because it turns out that the standard thinking is squeeze as many bums in seats.
Yeah, of course.
Didn't fly with them, right? Because they have bigger bodied people.
Yeah.
So they said, we want more space. And they were accommodated.
Me too.
Yeah, I do too.
Space.
I want more elbow room.
Yeah.
I want people drooling on me.
Like we're here talking about Agile Alcoholics Anonymous or Agile Anonymous.
Arguing Agile. Same thing though.
It's the same thing.
Sorry. And I'm making a case for Waterfall, which is like, You're like, hey, you're the worst Scrum Master in the world. I'm not. I'm open to knowing that there's a space where I don't value customer feedback. There are niches where
I don't know.
I'm not. If I'm building the house, I'm going as waterfall as I can because, good Lord, unless you have an unlimited pocketbook, I don't want you to try to keep me to a $450,000 bid and then I can't do it.
I don't know, man. Like that's time and materials versus labor, like rookie move right there. Like I'll pay the time and materials if I get to keep changing my plans for the house.
Yes,
at the last minute, you know.
But once a bid is in, that's the difference. Is you have to change the bid process. If the bid process isn't changed, they're going to go, oh, I want a bigger kitchen. And it's like, okay, what's going to be more money? And they're like, no. And I'm
that's again, fixed costs versus time and materials. Like you got to figure out are you building because you only have that much money and your company's going to fail if you run over by a single dollar, or we're going to build a house until the money runs out. And we kept adding bedrooms and we figured out we only really needed 3. We like 5 was in the original plan, but after 3 we decided we'd rather keep that money and do whatever.
Well, go the other way and say, well, we really need an elevator in our house, right? We never thought of that up front, but now we need an elevator, but we have to move the bathrooms around to make space for an elevator shaft. It can go either way.
Again, it goes back to that early childhood. Once I get into this environment where the uncontrollable, the unknowable, right? The great unknown is the factor. These defects in personality come out where they try to control everything they can so they can at least feel some sense of control. Even though it's a fallacy, it's a big problem.
Well,
sure.
So tell me this. You grow up in an Agile framework and you don't even know it. And I say this is...
Yeah, you're right.
Education is built around Agile framework. Look, we're going to do multiplication tables, and if we're not good, we're going to keep doing multiplication, and then you eventually move on, and like it even through college. But at some point, how does a brain get molded into this whole define everything up front, and then...
I think when you're young of age, risk doesn't come into it really all that much. As you get older, you become more risk averse because the consequences of getting things wrong become apparent to you. And so you hide behind this facade of not taking risks at all. And that leads to, the need to know everything up front.
Mm-hmm.
So you change what works? Isn't it a risk to change like that? I mean, if I were to work with new kids coming out of college, they still live an Agile world in college, right? You're working up to a goal of passing, but...
I mean, some of them do. Like, if we're in the spirit of arguing Agile, like, some of them do. I just talked to a data scientist today who is fairly young in their career. And so, going through school is so fresh in their mind, whereas I can barely remember going through school, right? And I can't remember why we got on the topic, but the topic was something along the lines of, it was advanced math. That's what the topic was, advanced math. I was like, I stopped short of taking calculus. I was like, because I didn't really need it for what my degree was, although it was interesting to me. But I was like, you have to realize, like, the way that I was taught math in school when I was a young child, I never really had a desire or liking for math. Because the way I was taught math in school, it was basically this. It was the gang boss stood in front of the job site and was like, who knows the answer to this? And someone was like, I know the answer, just because they can think quicker than everyone else. They're the smart kid, just because they happen to think quicker. I can come to the same answer given, 10, 15 more seconds or whatever. But now I'm not good at math because I can't think as quick at that. Or worse, I give the wrong answer, and then the gang boss in front of the class is like, you're stupid. Can I have an answer from someone who's not an idiot? Again, you think I'm going to go far in my life with math if that is my entrance to learning the subject? That
penalizing behavior from the gang boss, what does that make you do, though? It makes you not want to offer up your answer, not want to put up your hand. You'll only speak when you're cool.
Came around? Isn't that one of the reasons? I mean, that's not. It was to give everybody a chance. I
don't listen to hip hop. Sorry, that was such a good. Sorry. Oh man,
and that's it all, folks.
It was such a good. I couldn't resist. Oh man.
Are you gonna cut this out, or are you gonna leave it in?
No, I don't know. I haven't decided.
Alrighty, I think almost hit it right. I mean, it's not taught that way nor recommended to taught that way. And the reason why is doesn't help and doesn't teach. So now there's a lot of fluidity in schooling.
Yeah.
And for the next, I don't know, foreseeable future, it's going to be that way. I know that's with my daughter, and she's 10. They were planning on being at a certain point, and they were not because the kids needed more help. And they said, all right, well, I don't care if I'm not going to get there or not. Like, I'm going to try to play catch up later, but if we don't get it, oh well. And it's like, okay, so it's been that way since I was there. I mean, there is times in college where the final is shaped only after he realizes what he can get to. Mm-hmm. But all the important stuff is front loaded.
Yeah.
All the basic stuff. And then your final is shifted at that, so the goalpost does change, but it's within reason.
Right, yeah.
You still gain knowledge. Your outcome is still achieved. You've passed the class with a standard of what that school or college deems as to be the appropriate level of knowledge on, let's say, economics 1. Mm-hmm. So you go to graduate, there's never a time at which they define everything up front. Sometimes they say, I'm going to try to teach you all this.
Yeah, these subjects or whatever.
But, I mean, at least I can't remember any time when they're like, we will hit every single one of these because I know this is what you need up front. Mm-hmm. And we will hit that. Otherwise, we're going to be working around the clock to make it happen. And you live in an agile world, more of an agile world so than a waterfall world. Yeah. So you talk about being risk averse, but maybe it's because they're overlooking the risk of people. Because now you're giving people a new way of working, unknown to how they're going to react to it. You just assume they need money and I'm willing to pay it, so they're going to accept that. They're going to accept that I can treat them that way. And so that's a missed risk by them. And so we now structure most company projects based on that. How does that make any sense? Why is there need for a transformation? Why would we go back to that? Why go away from what was working? Because you're dealing with, everything is at the root of people. Mm-hmm. People consume the products. Mm-hmm. People make the products. People. People inherently agile in nature. That's how they learn the most. So why do we take the risk of going away from that? That would be my question, is because it's better for your pocketbook, but it's not. It's proven to not be.
I see his ears are perked up. He's gonna.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good stuff.
He's gonna spit on it.
He's gonna pounce on this one. Like before Ohm pounces on this one, control is my answer. And all of these systems inside of a normal, typical company have basically co-opted and given you this sense of control as long as you play by and abide by the system that's in place. But the system with its yearly budget and its, if you don't use it by X month or whatever, you're going to lose it. That doesn't contribute to anything that you're talking about, Curtis, at all.
Absolutely correct. It doesn't. And the system that Brian's talking about, it's essentially leading people to be risk averse. That's what it's doing, right? That's exactly why we have these yearly budgets, because we say, well, the maximum amount that we can allocate to anything, an initiative, is this. Right. As opposed to let's fund the opportunities, right? So the system is basically making people risk averse. College is great that way, I understand. But in college, you're not spending someone else's money. So as soon as you go to work,
you're not.
Well, you're not spending
federally backed loans. That is someone else's money. You are paying for it.
It's your money.
Not that point. It's not. It's not for another 4 years.
Sure, but ultimately it's like a loan, right? So it's your money in the end. But when you go to work and you're allocated a budget, that's not your money. That's the company's money. And ultimately, somebody feels in control of that budget. They're going to say, I don't trust you with more than just this amount. Go play with this and see what you can make happen. Oh, by the way, here are all the things I want you to do in that budget. Like they know what can be done ahead of time. The whole system is geared up to making people avoid risk. And that's part of the problem. Yeah. And this is not the case in every country, by the way. Some countries do better at this than other countries do. In some countries, they just say, look, we don't know. So we're going to say, here's this money, and if it's blown, let's learn from that, right? But for the most part, in the Western countries, developed countries, that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, what we suspect is the reason for this, because everything, like management, going back to 1913, management, the discipline, was adopted by companies because companies needed management. The company owner was the leadership. The company owner was I'm going to tell you why I want things done, right? I'm going to tell you what things need to be done, and then the management helps you figure out how to do those things. And then that management, now here we are 100 years later plus, And that management now is basically answering a bunch of questions that they really have no expertise, never had expertise in dealing with. But again, now that we're dipping into the realm of Taylorism, that signals that we are basically done with this podcast. Like, we're going in this category that we were talking about was if the Scrum Master, Agile Coach, whatever we want to call them, if you're the change agent in the organization, if you really are the process owner in the organization, then it falls on you to take that process and say, hey, there's no way we can successfully do this process or scale this process or be successful past one team or whatever if we don't also reform the way that we fund teams, the way that we sponsor products rather than projects.
Or how we forecast a cost revenue.
Right, exactly. But so those have nothing to do with your team. They may not even have anything to do with your segment of the business. They may be completely different people in the business that you've never even interacted with, that don't know any of your bosses or anything. I have no idea that you even work at the company, depending on the size of the company. That is your mountain to climb now when you're in that position. And again, I go back to these skills are not in the development, the tech wing of the company or whatever. So if you're hiring someone to say, oh, well, I'm just going to have you play the role of the Scrum Master, to ask somebody on my team who has no background and skill and education in formation of teams and how Agile teams work and how Agile teams are financed, basically, and how product people work and what product people should be doing. If you're a Scrum Master and find yourself in the precarious position of trying to help product stand up from the ground up, all this is on you now to help with. So I really feel like we've hit on another subject on another podcast.
Right.
Next week.
Yeah. This is a continuing
Taylorism principles.
Oh, no, we already did that one. We're not doing that
we
one
did
again.
that one. That was a long one we did. That was one of the biggest podcasts we've done in terms of length. Like it was a 2-hour one or something.
It was. We recorded for 3.5 hours.
3.5
but I think
hours.
it cut down to like. I think it cut down to like 2 hours and something. All right, let's wrap this session.
All right, let's wrap up. This has been quite an interesting podcast.
Around
We
the
welcome
world.
Curtis back. Please let us know what you think a good title might be for a process owner, Scrum coach, etc., etc. Let us know, and don't forget to subscribe. Smash that like button.
Hold on, I got you.